In the dim heart of ancient Rome, beneath the golden glow of flickering oil lamps and the weight of centuries carved into marble and stone, a strange kind of justice ruled, a justice not meant for mercy, but for order. Rome was a city obsessed with discipline, with hierarchy, and above all, with control. Its streets hummed with the footsteps of senators in white togas, slaves carrying baskets of figs, and soldiers whose faces were carved in the image of obedience. Yet, behind this facade of greatness lay a system built not on compassion, but on fear. To the Romans, punishment wasn't merely about retribution, it was a performance, a grand, chilling spectacle meant to keep the masses in line. The empire stretched across continents, from the cold mists of Britannia to the golden deserts of Egypt. And with every new conquest came new laws, new crimes, and new, often grotesque, ways of enforcing obedience. In the eyes of the Senate, justice was balance, and balance could only be achieved when every wrongdoing was repaid with equal or greater suffering. Imagine, for a moment, the bustling forum filled with traders shouting the prices of their olives and fabrics, as a different kind of crowd gathered near the marble steps, not for debate or trade, but to witness punishment. The air would grow tense, thick with anticipation and fear. For the Romans, punishment was a lesson, a warning, and at times, a form of entertainment. To them, the crack of a whip, the moan of a condemned man, or the dull thud of a body hitting the ground was as familiar as the sound of prayer. In this world, crime was not simply a moral failing. It was a disruption of divine order. The gods themselves were believed to favor justice, and the rulers of Rome saw themselves as instruments of that divine will. If a citizen betrayed the state, if a slave disobeyed, or if a soldier showed cowardice, the punishment had to be seen, felt, and remembered by all. The Romans believed in what they called disciplina, a sacred form of order that kept the empire from collapsing into chaos. And so, punishment became both a necessity and an art. A thief caught in the act might be stripped naked, tied to a wooden post in the center of the market, and flogged with the flagrama whip embedded with shards of bone and iron, designed not only to hurt but to humiliate. The crowd would watch in silence, the lashes cutting through flesh like strokes on parchment, each one writing the story of Rome's authority on the human body. For the onlookers, it was a grim reminder. One act of defiance could lead to a lifetime of scars or to death. And yet there was no rebellion, no outrage. Pain had become normalized, folded into the fabric of Roman life. In their philosophy, suffering was a tool, not a tragedy. Even philosophers like Seneca and Cicero spoke of pain as an instrument of virtue, something that revealed the true strength of character. To endure punishment without a cry was a mark of honor. To beg for mercy was shameful. Roman soldiers, perhaps the most disciplined men in history, lived in constant fear of their own codes. Within the legions, disobedience could mean death, but even lesser crimes, stealing food, sleeping on duty, or failing to follow orders, were met with flogging or forced labor. The Roman army even practiced a punishment called decimation, where every 10th soldier in a disgraced unit was executed by his comrades, regardless of guilt. It was not about individual justice, it was about purifying the group through shared fear. The message was clear: Rome survived because men obeyed, And if fear was the price of obedience, so be it. In the heart of the city, justice was also political theater. The emperors, draped in power and paranoia, often turned trials into public shows. A man accused of treason might not face a fair court, but rather the whims of the emperor's amusement. Caligula, known for his madness, once condemned a man to death simply because he disliked his expression. Nero, the self-proclaimed artist emperor, took it further. He transformed executions into performances. He would invite guests to his gardens at night and illuminate the paths with the bodies of prisoners burned alive as living torches. The crowd gasped, not in horror, but in awe. For them, this was divine justice, an emperor asserting his godlike control over life and death. Yet, beneath the glitter of gold and marble, the blood of the punished ran deep into the cracks of the empire. Slaves suffered the most. They were property, bodies without names, and the law offered them no protection. A slave could be whipped for speaking out of turn, branded with a hot iron for running away, or crucified for striking his master. Crucifixion, in particular, became the symbol of ultimate disgrace, punishment reserved for the lowest of the low. Victims were nailed or tied to wooden crosses along public roads, left to hang for days under the burning sun, their agony serving as a warning to everyone who passed. Yet to Rome, this was not cruelty, was order made visible. One of the most chilling examples of Roman collective punishment came in the case of Pedonius Secundus, a wealthy senator murdered by one of his slaves. Roman law decreed that when a master was killed, every slave in his household should be executed to prevent rebellion. And so, nearly 400 men, women, and children, many innocent, were put to death. The people of Rome protested, but Emperor Nero silenced them with a simple argument. If fear kept slaves loyal, then justice had been served. This cold, mechanical logic defined the Roman way. Mercy was weakness, compassion a threat. Their entire civilization rested on the belief that pain preserved peace. The spectacle of punishment extended beyond the courts and into the arenas. In vast amphitheaters like the Colosseum, punishment became entertainment on a grand scale. The condemned criminals, rebels, and prisoners of war were thrown into the arena for damnatio ad bestiam, condemnation to the beasts. The crowd roared as lions, leopards, or bears were released, their hungry eyes reflecting the glow of the afternoon sun. For Rome, this was not only sport, but a ritual reaffirmation of dominance. Man's death fed the empire's glory. Even poets like Juvenal and Martial described these events with fascination, their verses blending horror with admiration. The Romans saw such deaths as cleansing acts, purging society of corruption and reaffirming divine justice. And yet, for all their cruelty, they believed deeply that they were righteous, that their empire was built not on cruelty, but on the disciplined pursuit of order. Beyond the amphitheater and the courts, smaller punishments carried their own symbolism. Debtors could be forced into slavery, or even have their property and, sometimes, their families seized as collateral. Women caught in adultery could be exiled or publicly shamed. Soldiers who deserted might be forced to stand unarmed in front of their comrades, awaiting death by their own hands. Each act of punishment carried a ritual weight, a reminder that Rome's laws were living things, breathing through the pain of its people. Even the gods, the Romans believed, demanded sacrifice, and so every lash, every drop of blood spilled was a tribute to the empire, to discipline, to the illusion of eternal control. But when the punishments ended, life resumed as if nothing had happened. Merchants reopened their stalls, children played in the dusty streets, and senators returned to their debates. The screams faded into the hum of everyday life, like waves retreating from the shore. Rome's beauty, its grandeur, and its terror coexisted in perfect silence. The marbled temples glowed in the sunlight, hiding the stains beneath. And in that silence, one could almost hear the ghosts of those who suffered, the slaves, the rebels, the forgotten. Their agony had shaped the peace that others enjoyed. Their blood had written the laws that others obeyed. And so, the story of Rome's punishments is not just one of cruelty, is one of obsession. Obsession with order, with legacy, with the idea that civilization could be maintained only through fear. The Romans taught the world how to build, how to conquer, how to rule, but they also taught it how to control through pain. Their punishments were not random acts of barbarity. They were deliberate, orchestrated lessons designed to remind every man, woman, and child of their place. From the highest senator to the lowest slave, everyone in Rome lived beneath the shadow of justice, justice that gleamed like polished marble, cold and beautiful, yet built on suffering. And as centuries passed, as the empire rose and fell, the echoes of those punishments lingered, whispering through the ruins, telling the story of a people who believed that fear was the foundation of greatness. The world of ancient Rome was one that thrived on discipline and control. But beneath the rigid laws and shining marble temples lay a fascination with pain that bordered on ritualistic. Every corner of the empire held echoes of punishment, echoes that spoke not only of justice but of power. To live in Rome was to live under constant observation. 4 eyes were everywhere, in the streets, in the markets, in the baths, even within the home. The empire's greatness depended on its citizens' obedience, and that obedience was secured by a carefully cultivated fear. From the highest senator to the humblest slave, everyone knew that Rome did not forgive easily. The Senate might pass laws, and the philosophers might debate virtue, but in practice, the empire ruled through the threat of suffering. Punishment in Rome was not simply a consequence. It was a performance designed to remind the people that disobedience came with a price too high to pay. The Roman mind found beauty in symmetry, in order, in the neatness of control, and cruelty somehow fit perfectly into that order. To understand their punishments, you must first understand their mindset. To the Romans, life was about honor, and honor could not exist without shame. They believed that fear, shame, and pain were essential tools for building good citizens. When a man broke the law, he didn't just harm another person, he insulted the very spirit of Rome. And Rome, in return, answered with punishment that was both poetic and terrifying. One of the strangest and most haunting forms of Roman punishment was called pona culae, the penalty of the sack. It was reserved for those who committed the most unforgivable crime imaginable, killing their own parent. The Romans viewed patricide not only as a crime against family, but as a crime against nature itself. To murder the one who gave you life was to destroy the moral foundation of the world. And so, the punishment was designed to reflect that horror. The condemned man would first be beaten with rods until he bled. then sewn into a leather sack, along with a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a snake. Once sealed, the sack would be thrown into a river, and the man would drown in darkness, surrounded by chaos, the biting, screeching, and thrashing of terrified animals. The Romans believed this strange ritual symbolized the disorder that such a man had brought into the world. To them, the punishment was not cruel. It was balance restored. The pona calae remains one of the most bizarre legal punishments in human history, a grim reflection of how Rome sought harmony through horror. But not all punishments were so symbolic. Many were brutally straightforward. Thieves, for instance, were often whipped publicly or forced to work in the mines, where darkness and exhaustion did the killing over time. The mines of Rome were places of slow death, where prisoners labored day and night, breathing in poisonous dust, chained together in eternal gloom. To be sent there was considered worse than execution. Soldiers who deserted their posts or refused to fight could be executed on the spot or subjected to fusturium, a punishment where fellow soldiers would beat the condemned to death with clubs. This was not merely about enforcing discipline, it was about cleansing shame from the ranks. Rome's legions marched under the weight of fear, and that fear made them unstoppable. Even the slightest hint of disobedience could bring destruction, not only to the individual, but to his entire unit. The Romans believed that shared fear forged unbreakable loyalty in the cities. Punishment took on a more theatrical tone. Public humiliation was common, and it served as both deterrent and entertainment. Criminals might be paraded through the streets wearing signs describing their crimes, spat upon by the crowd as they were led to their fate. Some were forced to stand for hours in public squares, shackled and exposed, their names forever stained. Others faced more creative fates. The Romans had a punishment called damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. This was not physical torture, but something perhaps even more devastating, complete erasure from history. If someone betrayed the state or fell out of favor with the emperor, their name would be struck from inscriptions, their statues destroyed, their family disgraced. It was as if they had never existed. The Romans believed that legacy was immortality, so to be forgotten was the cruelest punishment of all. For those who offended the gods or were accused of sorcery, punishments could become deeply ritualistic. Priests and magistrates would preside over purifications meant to cleanse the city of impurity. The guilty might be burned alive as offerings to the divine, or thrown into rivers as sacrifices to appease angry spirits. These acts were performed with solemn ceremony, often accompanied by music and chanting, giving the illusion that pain could purify. To the Roman mind, suffering had meaning. It could restore order to a world that threatened to spiral into chaos. Their punishments, in this sense, were not random acts of cruelty, they were cosmic corrections, ensuring that every wrong deed found its rightful response. Even the home, which might seem like a refuge, could become a place of punishment. Fathers wielded absolute authority over their households under the ancient law known as patria potestas. A father could disown, exile, or even kill his children without facing legal consequences. This power was rarely used, but deeply feared. The home reflected the empire structured, disciplined, and ruled by hierarchy. A father was the emperor of his family, and his word was law. The boundaries between private and public punishment blurred. creating a society where control began at birth. Every Roman child grew up understanding that the hand of authority, whether from father or emperor, was not to be questioned. As the empire expanded, its punishments became more diverse, absorbing ideas from conquered lands. In the eastern provinces, flaying and impalement appeared. In the north, burial alive was used as a tool of terror. Yet even as Rome borrowed from others, it always gave these punishments its own signature of precision and ceremony. Everything had to have order, even death. The condemned were not killed in chaos. They were executed with structure, witnessed by officials, recorded by scribes. Every punishment was documentation of power. To watch a Roman punishment was to watch an empire reminding itself of its own strength. People came not only to see justice, but to feel the pulse of Rome, to remind themselves that they were part of something immense and unstoppable. In a world so vast and unpredictable, punishment provided certainty. It was a dark comfort, a ritual of reassurance that the world was still in balance. As the whip cracked, as the crowd roared, as the condemned met his fate beneath the sun, Rome felt whole again. And when it was over, when the sand was stained with blood, when the bodies were carried away, the city simply went on. Vendors reopened their stalls, selling bread and honey cakes. Children laughed in the streets. Musicians played their flutes near the fountains. Life resumed, indifferent to the horror it had just witnessed. The silence that followed each punishment was almost sacred, a collective exhale from a society that had just reaffirmed its own power. The Romans were masters of contradiction, able to build aqueducts and libraries, write poetry and philosophy, and yet find beauty in cruelty. Perhaps that is why their empire lasted so long. It understood that fear was the most enduring form of loyalty. As the centuries passed, the punishments grew more theatrical, more creative, as emperors competed to outdo their predecessors in displays of authority. But beneath all the spectacle, the message remained the same: Rome endures because Rome controls. In their world, mercy was chaos, and order, no matter how bloody, was peace. So when you close your eyes and imagine that vast empire, the marble statues, the roaring crowds, the blinding sun over the Colosseum, remember that behind the glory was always the shadow of fear. Rome's greatness was not just built on stone and steel. It was built on the bones of those who defied it. As the Empire of Rome reached the height of its glory, stretching across continents and centuries, its fascination with punishment deepened into something almost ceremonial, grim religion of control, where pain and order became indistinguishable. To live in Rome was to be constantly reminded of the state's power to shape life and death. Every street, every column, every arena whispered the same message. The law was eternal, and defiance came with a price. The Romans did not simply punish crime, they choreographed it. Each sentence, each execution was delivered with an air of solemnity that blurred the line between justice and theater. The city itself seemed built to host suffering. From the vast marble amphitheaters, where thousands gathered to watch death as spectacle, to the narrow alleys where smaller acts of vengeance took place, punishment was everywhere. It was embedded in the rhythm of daily life, in the rhythm of empire. To the Romans, fear was not an emotion to avoid, it was a tool to refine. Fear disciplined the heart, sharpened the will, and reminded the people that peace existed only through obedience. Among the many punishments that defined Rome's cruel beauty, none were as iconic as crucifixion. Though not originally a Roman invention, they perfected it with chilling precision. The condemned slaves, rebels, and traitors were forced to carry their own crossbeams through the city streets, jeered at by crowds who gathered to witness the slow parade of death. The executioners would drive nails through the wrists and ankles, lifting the body against the sky, leaving the victim to hang for days under the blazing sun. Sometimes, the bodies were lined up along busy roads, turning travel itself into a lesson in submission. Crucifixion was not meant to kill quickly. It was designed to humiliate, to draw out agony, to remind everyone that Rome's authority reached even into the afterlife. The victims hung between earth and heaven and claimed by both, their suffering suspended like a warning written against the sky. The Romans saw no contradiction in this. For them, it was order made visible. The empire thrived on symbols, and the cross was one of its most terrifying. Yet, not all punishments required blood. Some were psychological, elegant in their cruelty. The Senate could strip a nobleman of his title, confiscate his property, and exile him to a remote island, a living death for a man of status. Exile, or relegatio, was a common punishment for those who offended the emperor or the gods. The condemned might find himself sent to a barren island in the Aegean, his name erased, his friends forbidden to speak of him. To the Romans, isolation was a fate worse than execution, for it denied a man his identity. The empire was everything. To be cut off from it was to vanish. Others faced financial ruin. Debtors were sometimes sold into slavery or forced to fight as gladiators to repay their dues. The arena, in this sense, became an economic machine of punishment. Every blow of the sword, a coin earned for justice. And then there were punishments born of pure imperial paranoia. Under tyrants like Domitian and Caracalla, accusations of treason became weapons of political survival. Informers thrived, and the wrong word, the wrong gesture, could lead to death. Trials were public affairs, where guilt was often decided long before the verdict. Sometimes, even the condemned were made to act out their crimes before execution, turning justice into a grotesque reenactment. The Romans had a saying, "Let justice be done, though the heavens fall." But in truth, justice was what pleased the emperor. The closer one stood to power, the more dangerous life became. Punishment was not just for the wicked, it was for the unlucky, for the lower classes. However, punishment was often swift and brutal. Slaves might be beaten, branded, or forced to labor in chains. Criminals could be burned alive, buried under collapsed buildings, or thrown from cliffs. The infamous Tarpeian Rock on the Capitoline Hill was a site of such executions. Those found guilty of treason or perjury were hurled from its height, their bodies smashed against the stones below. It was said that the echo of their fall could be heard across the city, a sound that silenced even the boldest tongues. Rome turned geography into judgment, making nature itself part of the empire's authority. Public punishment also served as a kind of moral theater. The Romans believed that witnessing pain purified the viewer. The sight of another's suffering reminded citizens of the consequences of sin, reinforcing the fragile fabric of society. This belief extended even to the games. Gladiatorial combat, often seen as entertainment, carried deep social meaning. Many of the condemned were forced to fight, not as warriors, but as warnings. Their blood was payment for their crimes. Each clash of steel in the arena was both a lesson and a prayer reaffirmation that Rome's order remained intact. And when the emperor raised his thumb, granting mercy or death, it was more than spectacle. It was divine authority manifested in flesh. But behind the grandeur of punishment lay an undercurrent of unease. Rome's obsession with justice was also an obsession with control. And as the empire grew older, the punishments grew crueler, as if the state itself needed more suffering to sustain its illusion of order. Emperors used cruelty as both fear and art. Caligula once invited guests to dinner, only to execute prisoners during the meal for entertainment. Commodus fought as a gladiator in the arena, killing condemned men for applause. Nero staged mock weddings between criminals and animals before feeding them to beasts. It was theater of horror city that worshipped its own power through pain. And yet, no one truly rebelled, for the idea of Rome was larger than any man's conscience. The people feared chaos more than cruelty. To live under Rome's harsh order was still better than to live without it. As time passed, punishments became more bureaucratic, more refined in their documentation. Officials recorded every crime, every death, every exile in meticulous detail. The state was obsessed with record-keeping, as if by naming every act of violence, it could maintain control over it. But the more Rome punished, the more its foundations trembled. Fear could maintain obedience, but it could not inspire loyalty forever. By the late empire, the people had grown numb to suffering. Public executions no longer drew the same awe. They became routine, background noise in a world desensitized to pain. Perhaps that was Rome's greatest tragedy in seeking eternal order. It forgot compassion entirely. Still, the idea of Roman justice endured. Even centuries after the empire's fall, the shadow of its punishments lingered in law and culture. The concept of public deterrence, of punishment as spectacle, carried through medieval Europe and beyond. Rome taught the world that the illusion of order could be maintained through fear, that cruelty could masquerade as civilization. And in that contradiction lay the secret of its endurance. The empire may have fallen, but its idea of justice, cold, efficient, and merciless, survived. When you walk today among the ruins of Rome's broken columns, the quiet stones of the Forum, the worn steps of the Colosseum, it is easy to imagine the ghosts of those who once suffered there. You can almost hear the faint murmur of crowds, the crack of the whip, the prayers whispered before death. The marble that once gleamed white is now weathered, yet beneath its silence lies a story of blood and control. Rome's punishments were never just about crime. They were about reminding the world who ruled it. And even now, centuries later, that whisper endures: order, no matter the cost. When the Roman Empire expanded beyond the borders of Italy, it carried its laws and punishments with it like sacred relics, spreading the gospel of order and pain to every corner of its dominion. From the misty frontiers of Britannia to the scorching sands of Egypt, the message was always the same: Rome's justice is absolute. But in these distant lands, far from the marble courts of the capital, punishment often took strange and local forms. blending Roman law with native customs in ways that even the Senate might have found bizarre. Soldiers stationed at the edges of empire became the judges and executioners of strange new crimes, meting out punishments that blurred the line between discipline and madness. These were not the grand spectacles of the Colosseum, but quieter, crueler acts rituals of obedience performed under the endless sky. Out here, the empire was not a shining idea carved in marble. It was a scar of discipline across the wilderness. The Roman army, disciplined and efficient, was also one of the harshest institutions ever created. For a soldier, the slightest hint of cowardice or insubordination could bring about unimaginable consequences. Among the most feared of these was decimation, a punishment so terrifying that it lived on in legend long after Rome's fall. When a unit displayed cowardice or mutiny, it would be lined up before its commanders. Every 10th man, chosen by lot, was executed by his comrades. There was no appeal, no mercy. Those spared were forced to witness the slaughter, sometimes compelled to bury the bodies of their own brothers. The punishment was designed not only to kill, but to destroy morale, to turn every survivor into a trembling reminder of Rome's authority. Even in triumph, the fear of decimation haunted the legions. The empire's greatest weapon was not its sword, but its terror. For civilians, life under Roman rule could be equally unforgiving. Crimes like adultery, blasphemy, or even speaking ill of the emperor could earn punishments that defied logic. Under Augustus, moral laws were introduced to preserve the sanctity of Roman family life. But the punishments for breaking them often revealed the hypocrisy of the elite. A woman caught in adultery could be exiled, stripped of her dowry, or even executed if her husband chose to press charges. Men, however, faced far lighter consequences. Less, of course, their lover was married to someone with political power. The double standards of Roman virtue were carved into the very bones of society. It wasn't morality they sought to protect, it was hierarchy. Every punishment was a statement about one's place in the world, a reminder that not all sins were equal. Religion, too, played a curious role in shaping punishments. The Romans believed the gods watched over every oath and contract, and to violate one was not just a legal crime, it was sacrilege. Those who defied the gods could face purification rituals that were as terrifying as they were absurd. A priest accused of blasphemy might be whipped in secret, the blows considered offerings to cleanse his soul. In one recorded case, an entire town was punished because its magistrates had neglected a festival dedicated to Jupiter. The punishment: the town's public funds were seized, and its leaders forced to carry sacred statues barefoot through the streets for days. Rome's law had a divine face, and to question it was to question the heavens themselves. The people obeyed, not only because they feared Rome, but because they feared damnation. But perhaps the strangest punishments were reserved for those who harmed the social order in ways that law alone could not define. Sorcery, treason, and rebellion all existed in the gray zone between crime and chaos. The Romans were deeply superstitious, and magic was treated with both fascination and dread. Anyone accused of casting curses or invoking spirits to harm another could be executed without trial. In one notorious case, hundreds of women were put to death in a single day on suspicion of witchcraft during the Republic. Their supposed crime: mixing potions that caused noblemen to fall ill. To the Roman mind, unseen forces were threats to order, and so they had to be crushed even if it meant inventing guilt where none existed. The empire could tolerate ambition, deceit, even greed, but never the loss of control. The punishment for parricide, the killing of one's parent, was perhaps the most bizarre and symbolic of all. The guilty were sewn into a leather sack, along with a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster, and then thrown into the Tiber River. This ritual, known as Pona Kole, represented the total inversion of nature. A man who killed his own blood had defied the natural order. So Rome returned him to chaos, buried alive, with animals stripped of air, light, and dignity. The choice of creatures was deliberate. Each symbolized madness, betrayal, and disorder. The dog, loyal and wrong. The snake, deceitful. The monkey, mocking humanity. And the rooster, heralding doom. To drown among them was to be erased, not just from life, but from the memory of mankind. Rome's punishments reflected its obsession with order in every possible form. Even in death, criminals were categorized. Some were denied burial, their bodies left to rot as warnings. Others were burned, so their spirits could not haunt the living. The Romans feared ghosts as much as they feared crime. Executions were often performed at specific times of day, aligned with religious calendars, to avoid angering the gods. The condemned were sometimes dressed in special garments or paraded through the streets, transforming their punishment into a civic ritual. For the average citizen, watching an execution was not simply entertainment. It was a spiritual reminder that the universe, like the empire, had rules. And yet, amid all this cruelty, there were glimpses of strange mercy. Occasionally, emperors would pardon criminals during public festivals, declaring it an act of divine grace. These moments were rare, but they served a crucial purpose: to remind the people that mercy flowed only from the top. Forgiveness, like punishment, was another weapon of control. To be spared by the emperor was to owe him your soul. The crowd would cheer, the condemned would weep, and Rome would bask in its illusion of fairness. But beneath the applause lay the same message: only power decides who lives and who dies. As centuries passed, the empire's justice system became tangled in bureaucracy. Governors, judges, and priests competed for authority, often inventing new punishments to display their zeal. The result was a labyrinth of fear. No one quite knew which rule might end their life. Even small offenses could spiral into tragedy. A soldier stealing bread could be flogged to death. A slave breaking a cup in his master's home might be crucified. Laws were interpreted through status, not reason. The higher one stood in Rome's hierarchy, the safer they were from the claws of justice. It was not equality that held the empire together. It was spectacle. But perhaps the cruelest punishment of all was the one no one saw: the slow, grinding machinery of fear that kept every citizen in check. People learned to censor their speech, to laugh carefully, to bow just enough but not too much. The empire had turned obedience into instinct. Its greatest victory was not over its enemies, but over its own people. Punishment was no longer just an event, it was a way of life. Rome's streets, gleaming with marble, were built upon generations of silence. And when the empire finally began to crumble, when the borders broke and the legions turned against themselves, it wasn't the sword that destroyed Rome. was exhaustion. The endless cycle of punishment and fear had drained its soul. The arenas fell silent, the whips stopped cracking, and for the first time in centuries, the empire's subjects began to dream of peace without pain. The world that rose from Rome's ashes inherited much from its roads, its laws, its architecture, but also its shadow, the belief that order must always come at a price. By the time Rome had stretched its dominion across seas and deserts, punishment had evolved into a language of its own, a dialect of power spoken through pain, silence, and spectacle. It was no longer just about controlling the body, but about shaping the soul. Every lash of the whip, every public humiliation, every whispered verdict was a syllable in the empire's great conversation with its people. To the Romans, punishment was not chaos. It was choreography. It was how order sang its song. But as the empire expanded, so too did its cruelty. And what began as discipline soon became theater rituals of suffering performed beneath the eyes of gods and men. The Roman imagination found infinite ways to break a person, not just physically, but spiritually. The worst crimes were met with punishments so elaborate they resembled performances more than justice. Rome did not simply punish the guilty, it turned them into lessons carved into flesh. One of the strangest of these lessons came in the form of damnatio ad bestiam, or condemnation to the beasts. In the great arenas, those found guilty of treason, arson, or murder were sent to die at the claws and teeth. Lions, leopards, bears, even crocodiles were imported from the far corners of the empire to feed this appetite for spectacle. But it wasn't merely execution, it was ceremony. The condemned were often forced to dress as mythological figures, reenacting scenes from legend before being devoured. A thief might play the role of Orpheus, charming beasts before being torn apart. A murderer might be cast as Prometheus, chained while vultures circled overhead. Each death was meant to please both the gods and the mob, moral play written in blood. The crowd would cheer, not just for death, but for the reaffirmation that justice was eternal and Rome was divine. For the condemned, even their final scream was scripted. But beyond the grandeur of the Colosseum, far from the cheering of crowds, punishment took more intimate and inventive forms. In the streets and baths, in the cramped rooms of tenements, smaller acts of vengeance unfolded, quiet punishments carried out by masters, husbands, and magistrates. The Roman household was itself a tiny empire, and within its walls, the paterfamilias, the male head of the family, was law. He could execute slaves, exile his wife, or disown his sons without consulting a judge. Domestic justice was swift and absolute. For slaves, especially, life was an unending performance of obedience. They were branded with hot irons, forced to wear iron collars inscribed with the words, "Hold me, for I am a runaway." Some were locked in basements for weeks. Others were made to fight each other for their master's amusement. The cruelty was not random, it was ritual. It reminded everyone that freedom was a gift, and Rome could take it back at any time, even among the freeborn. Humiliation was a favored tool of discipline. The Romans believed that shame could cleanse sin just as effectively as pain. Offenders were paraded through the streets, forced to wear rags or strange costumes while crowds jeered. Sometimes their hair was shaved, a symbolic stripping of dignity. In one account, a corrupt tax collector was made to stand naked in the Forum. His ledgers burned before him as a reminder of his greed. These punishments were designed to wound the soul more than the body, to mark a man as an example. For a society obsessed with honor, humiliation was a death of reputation, a punishment that could outlast even crucifixion. The empire's provinces, however, often reimagined Roman punishment in their own ways. In Egypt, for instance, the local governors mixed Roman law with ancient rituals of purification. Criminals were sometimes forced to kneel in the sun for days, surrounded by incense and chanting priests until they confessed or fainted. In Gaul and Britannia, punishments retained a tribal brutality. Heads of rebels were displayed on spikes, their faces painted to resemble masks of terror. Rome allowed such customs to persist, not out of mercy, but out of practicality. Fear, after all, worked best when it spoke the local tongue. The empire didn't need to impose uniform cruelty. It only needed to maintain the illusion of unbroken power. One of the most chilling aspects of Roman justice was its precision. Punishment was never random, it was mathematical. The severity of the sentence matched not just the crime, but the status of the accused. A noble might be exiled for treason, while a slave committing the same act would be burned alive. The logic was clear. The higher a man's birth, the more valuable his suffering. The lower his rank, the less it mattered. Even death had a hierarchy. The elite were allowed to commit suicide rather than face execution, a final act of dignity reserved for those of class. For commoners, death was public and shameful. For slaves, it was often meaningless, their names forgotten before their blood had dried. In Rome's universe, inequality wasn't injustice, it was design. Religion again intertwined with these punishments in strange ways. During certain festivals, criminals were sacrificed to appease angry gods, their deaths believed to cleanse the sins of the city. In other cases, the condemned were forced to swear oaths before statues of deities, begging forgiveness in their final moments. If thunder struck during an execution, it was seen as divine approval. The line between law and superstition blurred completely. Every punishment became an act of faith. Even the emperors, in their paranoia, began to see rebellion and heresy as spiritual diseases requiring purification by fire. The later centuries of Rome became a fever dream of divine justice, where every death was both punishment and prayer. Among the strangest imperial decrees was that of damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. This punishment did not kill the body, but the idea of a person. When someone betrayed the emperor or fell from favor, all traces of their existence were erased. Their statues were destroyed, their names chiseled from inscriptions, their portraits defaced. It was a slow, deliberate erasure, as though history itself were being rewritten. For the Romans, this was the ultimate fate: to be forgotten, to have your name swallowed by silence. It was a punishment reserved not for petty criminals, but for those who had dared to touch the heart of power. To be erased from memory was to die twice, and yet, despite all its horrors, there was something strangely hypnotic about Roman justice. It possessed a symmetry, a terrible beauty that fascinated even its victims. The empire treated cruelty as art, suffering as philosophy. Each punishment carried meaning, symbolism, ritual. Even in torment, there was order. It was this paradox that made Rome so enduring: its ability to turn pain into poetry, To the Romans, every punishment was a reminder of the fragile line between civilization and chaos, between man and beast. They believed that without fear, society would crumble, that mercy was weakness. And so, they built their world on the bones of those who disobeyed, calling it peace as the centuries drifted on and the empire began to fade. These punishments, symbols of glory, turned into echoes. The arenas crumbled, the execution grounds grew silent, and the last echoes of Roman cruelty were swallowed by time. But their legacy endured, carried into the laws of kingdoms that came after. Medieval Europe inherited the spectacle of punishment, the public hangings, the drawn-out tortures, the belief that pain could purify the soul. Even today, in the quiet logic of modern law, one can trace the ghostly outline of Rome's cold justice. The empire may have fallen, but its idea of punishment, majestic, merciless, by the twilight years of the Roman Empire, when the marble began to crack and the legions no longer marched with the same unshakable rhythm, punishment took on a new and desperate tone. It was as if the empire, sensing its own decay, turned inward and began devouring itself. The laws grew harsher, the trials shorter, the executions more creative. Rome's cruelty, once methodical and ceremonial, had become almost feverish, a sign not of strength but of fear. The emperors, surrounded by betrayal and conspiracy, demanded ever more elaborate displays of loyalty. And in a world where suspicion was a death sentence, punishment became not just a tool of control, but a ritual of survival. Every drop of blood spilled was meant to remind the people that the empire still lived, still breathed, even as it rotted from within. The public executions of this late period were no longer about moral instruction or divine order. They were about theater and power. The Colosseum still thundered with cheers, but the games had grown darker. Where once prisoners reenacted noble myths, now they played scenes of treachery and madness. Prisoners were forced to act out the murder of emperors or the burning of Rome, blurring the line between history and punishment. The symbolism was chilling. The empire punished its own story. In one recorded case, under the rule of the paranoid Emperor Commodus, criminals were dressed as senators and executed to the laughter of the crowd. Their deaths meant to mock the political elite. The arena had become a mirror reflecting Rome's corruption, but no one dared look away. For to stop watching was to stop believing, and Rome survived on belief. Away from the roaring crowds. However, quieter forms of punishment flourished. The prisons of late Rome were damp, airless holes carved beneath temples or marketplaces. There was no concept of rehabilitation. Prisons were simply waiting rooms for death. The Tullianum, Rome's most infamous dungeon, was said to smell of rust and despair. Prisoners were thrown into its darkness and left there to starve, often chained to the walls until they became part of them. Some were drowned in the filth that collected at the bottom, their bodies later discarded into the Tiber-like refuse. To be sent there was not just to die, it was to vanish. The city above continued to feast and gamble, while beneath its stones, men begged for the mercy of oblivion. In the provinces, the methods of punishment became even stranger as local governors experimented with old traditions and imperial decree. In North Africa, criminals were buried up to their necks in sand and left for the desert sun to finish. In the Eastern territories, where Greek influence still lingered, Executions were sometimes accompanied by long speeches about virtue and fate, turning death into a kind of philosophical performance. The Romans saw no contradiction in this. Philosophy and cruelty had always walked hand in hand. Cicero could speak of justice in the Senate by day and watch a crucifixion by night without flinching. To the Roman mind, reason was not opposed to punishment, it justified it. Pain was proof of order. Religious persecution added a new layer of terror to this already suffocating world. As Christianity began to spread through the empire, those who refused to worship the Roman gods were branded as enemies of both faith and state. The punishments for defying imperial religion were vicious and public. Christians were burned alive, torn by beasts, or nailed to crosses in imitation of the very man they worshipped. But in a dark twist, their endurance under torture inspired sympathy, even admiration, among the Roman crowds. What was meant to be a deterrent became, instead, a strange kind of rebellion. The empire found itself haunted by martyrs, people who embraced punishment as proof of their faith. In trying to destroy them, Rome immortalized them. The emperors themselves often became victims of the same cruelty they commanded. Assassination was a constant shadow, and paranoia bred a culture of preemptive punishment. Under emperors like Caracalla, Domitian, and later Diocletian, entire families could be executed on suspicion of treason. Slaves were tortured to extract confessions about their masters. Senators were forced to take their own lives to prove their loyalty. The imperial palace, once a symbol of power, had become a cage filled with whispers and blood. Rome's rulers, who once punished others to maintain control, now feared the same fate from those closest to them. The empire was devouring its own reflection. One of the most grotesque punishments of this era was the crucifixio damnatorum ad effigiam, the crucifixion of criminals in effigy. When a condemned man escaped or died before his sentence could be carried out, an effigy made of straw or wax was crucified in his place. It was symbolic justice, a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion that no one could defy Rome's will, not even the dead. The effigy would be paraded through the streets, mocked by the crowd, then nailed to a wooden cross and left to rot like flesh. It was punishment, stripped of substance, but filled with meaning, a haunting metaphor for the empire itself, still performing strength, even as its heart decayed. Even animals were not spared from this system of symbolic justice. If a beast killed a Roman citizen, whether by accident or in the arena, it might be executed in return, often in elaborate ceremonies. A dog that failed to protect its master could be crucified as a lesson in loyalty. A horse that stumbled during a triumphal parade might be sacrificed to Mars for bringing shame upon the victory. The logic was insane, yet deeply Roman. Everything in the empire had its role, and failure to fulfill it demanded punishment. To the Romans, cruelty toward animals was not senseless, it was order applied to all creation by the 4th century. When Christianity began to seep into the very fabric of power, punishment began to change once more. The new faith softened the edges of cruelty, replacing public spectacle with penance and exile. But even here, the old Roman spirit persisted. The cross, once a symbol of shame, became the emblem of salvation, a strange transformation that could only have been born in Rome. The empire that perfected crucifixion ended up worshiping a man who was crucified. There is something hauntingly poetic in that irony, as if history itself were mocking the logic of power. Still, cruelty did not vanish. It merely changed costume. The Christian emperors of the late empire continued to exile, torture, and execute, but now they did so in the name of God rather than Jupiter. Heretics replaced traitors. Blasphemy replaced treason, but the essence was the same. Rome had baptized its cruelty, sanctified its fear, and so, even as the old gods fell silent and the temples turned to dust, the machinery of punishment rolled on, eternal and indifferent. When the Western Empire finally collapsed, when the last emperor was deposed and the barbarians walked through the gates, they found a world already broken by centuries of its own discipline. The arenas stood empty, the marble cracked, the prisons overflowing with ghosts. But the idea of Ramit's belief in order through suffering did not die. It seeped into the laws of the new kingdoms, into the very bones of Europe. The punishments that would follow burnings, tortures, inquisitions were echoes of Rome's dying breath. The empire had fallen, but its cruelty had become the foundation of civilization. And now, when one walks through the ruins of the Colosseum, beneath the arches that once framed 1,000 deaths, there is an eerie quiet that feels almost sacred. The stones, pitted and sun-bleached, seem to remember. The air itself hums with ghosts, the roar of the crowd, the clash of chains, the whispered prayers of the condemned. The empire is gone, but its memory lingers in every shadow, every echo. Perhaps that is the truest punishment of all, to build something so vast, so powerful, that it can never quite disappear, no matter how much time tries to erase it. In the dimly lit corridors of ancient Roman justice, punishment was not merely a consequence, it was a performance. The city that prided itself on order, law, and civilization had a side that was far darker, where cruelty wore the mask of entertainment, and the suffering of a few became a lesson for the masses. In this chapter, let us drift into the bizarre, almost unbelievable world of Rome's strangest punishments acts that combined legal order with theater, religion with spectacle, and morality with blood. Imagine yourself walking through the marble streets of Rome, the air heavy with the scent of olive oil, roasted meat, and fear. A crowd gathers at the Forum, not for a political speech or a gladiatorial game, but for something even more chilling, a public execution that would become the talk of the empire for weeks. The Romans believed punishment must fit not just the crime, but also the character of the criminal, and in doing so, they created methods of torment that seem unimaginable today. One such horror was the pona calet, or the punishment of the sack, a grotesque execution reserved for the ultimate crime parricide, the killing of one's own parent. The condemned would be beaten with rods until barely conscious, then sewn into a large leather sack along with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. Once sealed, the sack was thrown into the nearest river, where the struggling animals and the criminal shared a watery grave. This punishment was more than death. It was a symbolic rejection of humanity itself. To kill one's parent was to defy nature, so the Romans made sure the murderer died among beasts, stripped of human dignity, erased from both earth and memory. The sack itself, heavy with life and terror, would twist and writhe in the water, as if possessed by demons. until it sank beneath the surfacer, spectacle both horrifying and mesmerizing for those who watched from the riverbank. Yet, what's even more haunting is how such an act was justified as divine justice. The Romans saw the family as sacred. To betray it was to betray the gods. In their eyes, the sack wasn't cruelty, was cosmic balance restored. But bizarre punishments weren't limited to murderers. Take the case of soldiers caught deserting the army. Rome's legions were the backbone of its empire, and loyalty was everything. Desertion, therefore, was seen as a personal betrayal of Rome itself. The punishment was often decimation, a ritual of terror meant to discipline entire units. When a group of soldiers showed cowardice or disobedience, they were lined up in tens, and every 10th man, chosen by lot, was executed by his own comrades. The unlucky few would face death, not at the hands of enemies, but of friends. Imagine standing in formation, feeling the weight of fate pressing down as lots were drawn, and the condemned waited in trembling silence for their turn. The survivors were forced to live with the memory of their comrades' deaths, a living reminder of Roman discipline's brutal edge. It wasn't just about punishment, it was psychological warfare designed to burn loyalty into the soul of every soldier. And yet, in the eerie calm of night after such an ordeal, you could almost hear the distant whisper of regret among the legionaries, wondering if Rome demanded too high a price for its glory. Other crimes were met with more theatrical punishments, ones that blurred the line between justice and performance. Consider the Colosseum, not only a place of games, but also a stage for punishment wrapped in pageantry. Criminals were sometimes forced to reenact mythological scenes in which the outcome was always fatal. A man condemned for theft might be dressed as Icarus and fly from a platform only to fall to his death before thousands. Others, playing the role of Hercules or Orpheus, were torn apart by wild beasts in front of cheering crowds. These mythological executions were gruesome lessons wrapped in spectacle, a way for Rome to say that even in death, order and story must prevail. The philosopher Seneca once wrote about the blood-soaked sand and the cries that echoed under the hot sun, and how people left the arena not horrified but entertained. The cruelty was normalized, even as Rome had mastered the art of turning pain into poetry. The Romans were also inventive in more subtle forms of punishment. Slaves caught stealing or rebelling were branded on the forehead with a hot iron, marking them forever as fugitives runaway. For them, freedom became an illusion, as their faces told the world their crime. Some were forced to wear heavy iron collars inscribed with messages like, "Hold me, lest I flee." Others were made to stand chained for hours in the public square while citizens mocked them. For Roman society, shame was as powerful as death, and the idea that humiliation could cleanse sin was deeply rooted in their moral code. Yet, beneath the surface, one wonders, did the Romans ever question the humanity of it all? Did any senator or magistrate ever look at a trembling prisoner and feel a flicker of pity? History remains silent on that point, perhaps because cruelty was so ingrained in the rhythm of life that pity was seen as weakness. One of the most disturbing but telling practices was damnatio, condemnation of memory. It wasn't physical torture, but it was perhaps more terrifying, erasure. When someone committed a crime against the state, usually treasoned their name, image, and legacy, were wiped from every record. Statues were destroyed, inscriptions chiseled away, and documents rewritten. To be forgotten was to die twice. This punishment was not about pain, but about obliteration. A fate worse than death for the Romans, who believed legacy was immortality. It's eerie to imagine that entire lives once celebrated were intentionally deleted from history, leaving only empty pedestals and faint traces of chiseling. Rome could make you vanish, not by killing your body, but by killing your memory. And then there was crucifixion, a punishment that Rome did not invent, but perfected with cold efficiency. It was designed not just to kill, but to display. Victims were paraded through the streets, stripped, flogged, and forced to carry the heavy crossbeam to the site of execution. There, they were nailed or tied to a wooden cross and left to die slowly under the sun, often over the course of days. It was humiliation and agony intertwined, a reminder that rebellion against Rome came at a terrible price. Crucifixion was so horrific that it was reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest of criminals, never Roman citizens, unless the emperor made a brutal exception. The roads leading into cities were lined with crosses during times of revolt, their silent figures swaying in the wind, a macabre warning from the empire to anyone who dared defy it. Perhaps the strangest thing about these punishments isn't their cruelty, it's how calmly they were accepted. Rome saw itself as a bastion of civilization, and yet beneath its marble facade beat a heart of iron. The people gathered to watch these acts, not with horror, but with fascination, the way one watches a storm from the safety of a balcony. For them, justice was not about mercy. It was about balance, order, and deterrence. And as night fell over the city and the fires dimmed, the same citizens who had cheered at executions would return home, whisper prayers to the household gods, and sleep peacefully beneath frescoed ceilings, believing they lived in a just and moral world. Rome's punishments were not only tools of fear, they were mirrors of its values. Each lash, each brand, each sack tossed into the river reflected a society obsessed with control, spectacle, and permanence. And though centuries have passed, their echoes remain. Modern civilization may look back in horror, but deep down, the fascination persists. The Romans may be gone, their laws forgotten, but the human hunger for justice and the empire that once punished with snakes, iron, and memory has long crumbled. Yet its bizarre punishments remind us of something unsettling, that cruelty, once justified, becomes ordinary, and once ordinary becomes invisible. As we drift further into the shadowed heart of ancient Rome's punishments, the line between justice and cruelty begins to blur until it vanishes entirely. It's easy to imagine that the Romans were simply barbaric, but that would be too simple a judgment. Their punishments were reflections of a deeper Philosophian obsession with order, hierarchy, and spectacle. The empire was built on control, and punishment was one of its sharpest tools. In the Roman world, pain was never wasted. It was designed, choreographed, and delivered like a ritual performance, a message written in blood and stone. For those in power, the suffering of a few was the stability of millions. But to walk through that world now, to imagine those punishments as they truly were, is to step into a theater of both horror and meninga, place where every act of cruelty carried a lesson. Take, for instance, the punishment known as damnatio ad bestiam. the condemnation to beasts. It was among Rome's most infamous methods of execution, reserved for slaves, traitors, Christians, and anyone deemed an enemy of the state. The condemned were thrown into the arena, often naked, armed with nothing but a dull blade or bare hands, and made to face lions, leopards, or bears imported from Africa. The roar of the crowd mingled with the growls of the animals as the doomed victims tried in vain to fight for their lives. To the Romans, this wasn't just entertainment, it was law transformed into spectacle, punishment into pageantry. The philosopher Tertullian, himself a Roman citizen, once wrote that the cries of the condemned echoed longer in the soul than the cheers of the crowd. Yet still, the people came, their faces lit with fascination as blood stained the sand. They called it justice. We would call it madness. But not all punishments were so immediate. Some were long, drawn-out ordeals meant to strip the condemned of hope before death ever arrived. One of these was forced labor in the mines, a punishment so severe it was described by ancient historians as a living death. Condemned criminals, slaves, or prisoners of war were sent to the mines of Sardinia, Spain, or Egypt to dig metals and salt under unbearable conditions. Shackled, half-fed, and constantly beaten, they worked until their bodies gave out. The air was thick with dust, their skin caked with soot, and their eyes grew dim from the darkness. Many died within weeks, their bones buried beneath the very rock they were forced to carve. Yet, for the Roman state, it was efficient. Why waste a body when it could still serve the empire's hunger for resources? To Rome, even suffering had to be productive. It's chilling to think that the mines, those dark, echoing chambers beneath the earth, were filled with the whispers of men who once walked free, but were now erased from the world above. Their punishment was not to die, but to be forgotten slowly, one breath at a time. Then there was exile, a punishment that might seem mild compared to execution or the arena, but to a Roman, it was spiritual annihilation. Romans were deeply tied to the land, their city, and their gods. To be exiled was to lose not only one's home, but also one's identity. Senators, poets, and generals who fell out of favor with the emperor were often banished to remote islands or far-flung provinces. The poet Ovid, for example, was exiled by Emperor Augustus to Tomi's modern-day Romania for reasons still debated by historians. In his writings, Ovid described the torment of being cut off from Rome, the loneliness, the cold winds, the endless horizon of sea and sorrow. Exile wasn't a punishment of the body. It was a slow starvation of the soul. It stripped away status, community, and purpose, leaving only memory as a cruel companion. For the elite, it was perhaps the most terrifying fate of all. To live without Rome was to not exist at all, even among Rome's citizens. Humiliation played a crucial role in punishment. Public flogging, for instance, was as common as it was brutal. The condemned would be stripped, tied to a post, and whipped with leather thongs embedded with metal or bone. The Roman crowd, ever curious, would gather to watch, their murmurs rising with every lash. Sometimes, after the flogging, the victim would be paraded through the streets as a living warning. To a modern ear, it sounds barbaric, but in the Roman mind, such punishments reinforced moral order. Shame, after all, was one of Rome's most powerful social tools. To be disgraced publicly meant losing one's honor, and honor in Rome was worth more than life itself. A man without dignity was like a city without walls, defenseless and open to ruin. That's why even minor offenses could lead to such visible punishments. A thief might lose his hand, a liar his tongue. Each wound was a symbol, each scar a sermon. The strangest punishments, though, were often reserved for the powerful, the emperors, senators, or generals who dared to challenge the delicate balance of Roman politics. When an emperor was overthrown, his fate was usually as bizarre as his reign. Take the case of Emperor Nero, whose tyranny and excesses became legend. When the Senate declared him a public enemy, Nero fled Rome, trembling and panicked. He eventually took his own life, but his punishment did not end there. His memory was condemned, his statues destroyed, his name erased, his image struck from coins. Rome's vengeance was complete only when even the mention of his name brought shame. Later emperors, too, faced similar ends. Caligula was assassinated by his own guards, his body desecrated. Commodus was strangled in his bath, and Caracalla was stabbed by a soldier while relieving himself by the roadside. For all their power, Roman rulers learned that the same cruelty they wielded could easily turn against them. In Rome, punishment was the great equalizer. No one, not even the emperor, was safe from its reach. Then there were punishments that mixed cruelty with creativity in ways that defy comprehension. The Tarpeian Rock, a steep cliff on the Capitoline Hill, was one such stage. Traitors and criminals were thrown from it, their bodies dashed against the stones below. The execution was not only a means of death, but also a symbolic act. The fall represented their fall from Rome's favor, their plunge from honor to disgrace. The echo of their screams would roll through the city, mingling with the hum of daily life, a reminder that treachery never went unpunished. Sometimes, as the story goes, the condemned would beg to be executed by sword instead of being thrown, but mercy was rarely granted. The rock, once a sacred site, became a silent witness to the empire's endless thirst for order through terror. There was also a curious punishment used against debtors and fraudsters: public ridicule. Offenders might be forced to stand naked in the forum with their crimes written on a placard hung around their necks. Some were forced to wear donkey ears or carry weights labeled with their sins. The purpose wasn't pain, but embarrassment, a punishment that cut into the ego more deeply than the flesh. The Romans understood that ridicule could destroy a man faster than any weapon. It was a social death sentence. As the empire aged, its punishments became both more codified and more elaborate. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest set of laws, laid the foundation, but later emperors expanded them, adding layers of ritual and symbolism. By the time of the late empire, executions were conducted with almost religious precision. The condemned were expected to confess, offer prayers to the gods, and die in silence. Stoicism was seen as a final act of Roman virtue. Those who screamed or cursed were said to die un-Roman, their souls restless and dishonored. Death itself became a stage, and the condemned were expected to play their parts with dignity. And yet, for all its cruelty, there was an odd beauty in Rome's sense of justice, a grim poetry in how it sought meaning, even in punishment. Every act, no matter how horrific, carried a lesson about loyalty, faith, and order. Rome believed that fear preserved peace, and in a strange way, it worked. The empire lasted for centuries, its authority unshaken, its laws feared and obeyed. But beneath the marble and might, the cost was written in human suffering. Thousands of nameless victim slaves, rebels, criminals, and innocents paid the price for Rome's sense of justice. Their cries may have faded, but the stories remain, echoing softly through time, like a whisper from the shadows of the Colosseum. When we think of punishment today, we see it as a means to reform. To the Romans, it was a means to remind a constant, visible assertion that Rome was eternal, that disobedience was a sin against the very fabric of the universe. Their punishments may have been bizarre, even monstrous, but to them, it was civilization defending itself against chaos. And so, the next time you stand before the ruins of the Forum, or gaze at the broken stones of the Colosseum, remember that those places once echoed not just with cheers, but with the cries of the condemned. Each one, a fragment of Rome's vast and brutal symphony of justice. As the Roman Empire expanded and centuries passed, the bizarre punishments that once defined its early years evolved but never softened. They merely changed shape, adapting to the politics, fears, and obsessions of each new emperor. By the time Rome had reached its imperial height, punishment had become not only an act of justice, but a statement of patera, message whispered through every province and echoed from every city gate. Rome remembers everything. And yet, behind that declaration lay an intricate web of rituals, beliefs, and cruelty, so peculiar that it feels almost theatrical when viewed through the lens of history. The empire's judicial system had transformed from a tool of order into an instrument of intimidation, where fear was the law's most reliable enforcer. Imagine walking through the bustling streets of Rome during the reign of Emperor Domitian, when paranoia clung to the city like a thick fog. The marble statues of gods and emperors loomed high. The scent of incense and sweat filled the air, and every whisper could be dangerous. In such an environment, accusation itself became a weapon. A single rumor of treason, sacrilege, or disrespect toward the emperor could doom even the most powerful men to the strangest forms of punishment. One day, a senator might be debating in the Senate. The next, he could be standing half-naked before the crowd, sentenced to death by beasts or burning. For commoners, the punishments were harsher still. But for the elite, they were often more creative, designed not only to destroy the body, but to annihilate the soul's pride. Take, for instance, the fate of those who dared to insult the gods. The Romans were deeply superstitious, and crimes of impiety, disrespecting temples, mocking rituals, or questioning omens were taken as threats to the empire's divine favor. A man found guilty of defiling a temple might be flogged, mutilated, and then paraded through the city with animal entrails draped around his neck. Grotesque warning to others that to offend the gods was to offend Rome itself. In extreme cases, offenders were buried alive within the walls of sacred sites, their deaths offered as atonement. These acts were not considered barbaric, but holy. The Romans saw punishment as part of the sacred contract between the people and their deities, believing that justice restored balance not just among men, but between heaven and earth. Even the Vestals, the priestesses of Vesta, were not spared, though revered as symbols of purity. Any Vestal who broke her vow of chastity faced the most chilling fate of all, being buried alive. The ritual was performed in silence. The condemned vestal was led beneath the earth into a small underground chamber furnished with a couch, a lamp, and a small amount of food and water. The entrance was sealed, and Rome's greatest symbol of virtue was left to die slowly in darkness. The idea was not to shed her blood, which would anger the gods, but to let her perish quietly, consumed by the silence of divine justice. To the Romans, it was purity punished by purity paradox that somehow made sense to a world governed by ritual and fear. And then there was the strange and brutal punishment of branding and mutilation, particularly during the later empire, when social order began to crumble and the need to control the masses became desperate. Criminals and traitors were branded on the forehead with letters that marked their crimes: F for fugitivus, fugitive; C for condemned, and others for thieves, deserters, or forgers. It wasn't just pen, it was permanent identity, a scar that declared guilt louder than words ever could. Some were even mutilated, their noses or ears cut off to make their shame visible forever. The Roman belief in the physical reflection of moral failure made such punishments seem just. To them, a disfigured face was the natural shape of sin. But behind that logic lay an unspoken truth. Rome was obsessed with control, not only of the body, but of the image, the memory, and even the soul. As the empire faced constant threats from barbarian invasions, plagues, and political conspiracies, punishments grew darker, fueled by fear and superstition. Under emperors like Diocletian and Decius, Christians were among the most brutally punished. Their refusal to worship Roman gods was seen as treasonous, a rebellion against the state's divine order. They were thrown to beasts, crucified, burned alive, or even boiled in oil. But what disturbed the emperors most was not their defiance, it was their calm. Many Christians went to their deaths singing hymns, eyes lifted to the heavens, their serenity unsettling the very crowd meant to be entertained. The Roman authorities, accustomed to seeing men beg for mercy, couldn't comprehend such peace in the face of agony. So, punishments became more elaborate, as if cruelty itself could break faith, but it never did. The more the Christians suffered, the more their numbers grew, and Rome's theater of punishment began to backfire. In trying to silence rebellion, the empire gave it a stage. Meanwhile, ordinary crimes continued to be met with equally strange and symbolic punishments. Thieves might be whipped and then crucified on miniature crosses, not to die, but to hang in humiliation for days. Fraudsters were sometimes coated in pitch and paraded through the streets before being thrown into the river. And in cases of betrayal, entire families could suffer. A father's treason might doom his sons and grandsons to slavery or execution. The concept of individual guilt was foreign to Rome. Crime was seen as a stain that spread through bloodlines. To cleanse it, Rome believed, one had to erase it completely. As the centuries rolled on and Rome began to rot from within, punishments took on an almost surreal quality. Under emperors like Caracalla and Elagabalus, who were both paranoid and theatrical, executions were often staged as performances at lavish banquets. Caracalla was known to invite guests to a feast, only to have some executed mid-meal for his amusement. Elagabalus, infamous for his decadence, once ordered criminals to be tied together and crushed beneath rose petals until they macabre blend of beauty and death that only Rome could produce. These acts were less about justice and more about power, a reminder that the emperor's whim was law, and mercy was merely decoration. Perhaps the most haunting punishment of all, however, was execution by burning, a method often used for arsonists, heretics, and rebels. The condemned would be tied to a post surrounded by dry reeds and oil-soaked wood. As the flames rose, the air would fill with smoke, screams, and the scent of burning flesh. Yet, for many Romans, this was not horror, it was purification. Fire, after all, was sacred to the gods. To die by fire was to be cleansed, consumed, and reborn into the afterlife, cleansed of sin. Some believed that those who burned at the stake would rise pure, their souls ascending with the smoke. Others saw it as a punishment so complete that it left no trace behind. Either way, it reveals something profound about Rome's soul. Cruelty was always accompanied by ritual, and death was never without meaning in the end. The strangest thing about Rome's punishments wasn't their brutality, was their calm. There was order, even in agony, ceremony, even in execution. Every punishment, no matter how cruel, was done with methodical grace. There were no chaotic mobs or senseless massacres, at least not officially. Everything was recorded, judged, approved, and performed according to law. The Romans saw themselves not as monsters, but as guardians of order in a chaotic world. And in a sense, that's what made them so terrifying. The cruelty wasn't born of Rajat, was born of belief. They truly thought they were preserving civilization through pain. It's that quiet conviction, that chilling calmness, that lingers in the ruins today. When you stand before the ancient stones of the Colosseum or the broken pillars of the Forum, you can almost hear it, the echo of chains, the murmur of prayers, the final breath of a man who once stood before the might of Rome and realized that mercy had no place here. The empire's justice was not about compassion or fairness. It was about balance, control, and spectacle. And though centuries have passed, the stories remain, haunting us with the reminder that power and cruelty often wear the same face. In the cold, marble heart of ancient Rome, where the scent of smoke from temple offerings mingled with the heavy perfume of power, the concept of justice was never gentle, never forgiving. It was a sharp-edged ritual that reminded every Roman, from the poorest beggar to the most gilded senator, that the empire's order rested not upon mercy, but upon fear. The idea of punishment in Rome was as sacred as the gods themselves. It was not merely a deterrent, but a display, a grand theater of consequence that ensured every citizen understood the price of rebellion. The Romans did not hide their cruelties behind walls. They performed them in the open, under the burning Mediterranean sun, where the city could watch and remember. As dawn crept over the Tiber River, casting its golden light on statues of gods who never blinked, the citizens would gather to witness the condemned. Whispers floated through the crowd, stories of treachery, theft, and sacrilege, each accompanied by its own elaborate penalty. There was something almost religious about it, the belief that through suffering, the moral balance of the universe was restored. The executioners moved like priests, precise and unflinching, their faces stoic as they carried out the will of the Senate and the gods. The most infamous of all Roman punishments was the Pona Calais, a gruesome spectacle reserved for parricides, those who murdered their own parents. Rome believed such a crime violated the most sacred bond of nature, and therefore the criminal must be erased, not only from society, but from existence itself. The ritual began in eerie silence. The condemned was stripped, flogged with blood-soaked rods, and sewn into a large leather sack, along with a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a serpent. Each creature was chosen for a reason. The dog for its loyalty, now turned savage. The rooster for its crowing mockery of dawn and rebirth. The monkey for its chaotic mischief, and the serpent for deceit. The sack would writhe and twist with the terror of both man and beast before it was cast into the river. Tiber, some said, the water carried away the sin. Others whispered that the gods simply did not want such impurity left upon the earth. The crowd watched, transfixed by the macabre poetry of it all, as the leather bag sank beneath the surface, leaving only ripples to mark the end of a life that had dared to defy Rome's sacred order. And yet, that was only one of the empire's bizarre inventions. For Rome, punishment was an art form. The more symbolic it was, the more powerful its message. Treason, for example, was punished by damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. The offender's name would be scratched from every inscription, every record, every monument. Statues were smashed, portraits defaced, and it was as though that person had never existed. For a Roman whose greatest desire was eternal remembrance, this was a fate far worse than death. Others met physical torment that defied imagination. Some were burned alive in the tunica molesta, a pitch-soaked garment that turned the victim into a human torch, an offering of flame to the gods of vengeance. Others were crucified, not just slaves or thieves, but rebels, deserters, and anyone who threatened the delicate machinery of Roman authority. Crucifixion was not merely execution. It was humiliation stretched across hours or even days, a slow unraveling of body and will under the unrelenting gaze of the sun. The condemned would hang until the birds grew bold enough to feast upon them, until the flies hummed in clouds and the bones cracked with thirst. Yet, to the Roman mind, this was not cruelty, was justice with meaning. Every stroke of the whip, every nail driven through flesh, was a reminder that Rome's order was eternal and its reach infinite. Even minor crimes carried strange punishments. Thieves could have their hands crushed between stones. False witnesses might have their tongues cut, or be paraded through the streets wearing wooden boards inscribed with their lies. Adulterers could be exiled to barren islands, stripped of their names, while runaway slaves were branded across the forehead with the letter F for fugitive, forever marked as property that dared to run. The city itself seemed to feed on this cycle of guilt and retribution. Crowds gathered, not from hatred, but fascination. They came to see the empire's ideals turned into spectacle. When night fell and the moon rose over the Colosseum's arches, even the shadows seemed to carry the echo of screams, mingling with laughter and applause. And then there were the punishments that blurred the line between justice and theater. Gladiatorial combat, though framed as entertainment, was often a death sentence in disguise. Criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war were thrown into the arena to face beasts or each other, their blood sanctifying the sand before tens of thousands of roaring spectators. For the crowd, it was exhilarating. For Rome, it was order through fear. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that watching men die taught the people to value discipline and virtue. though even he confessed to the horror of such scenes. Others were forced to reenact myths, condemned to die as characters in plays about the gods. A thief might play the role of Prometheus, chained and torn apart by an eagle. A murderer could become Orpheus, devoured by beasts for daring to descend into darkness. There was a strange symmetry to it, a blending of art and agony that only Rome could perfect. The punishments extended beyond the physical, too. Some Romans faced exile, a quieter death that stripped them of identity, wealth, and connection. To be banished from Rome was to be cut from its heartbeat, left adrift in foreign lands where no one spoke your name. The streets that once echoed with your footsteps would forget you, and even your house might be seized by the state. Others were condemned to the Mensa fate, reserved for slaves, debtors, and rebels. Deep underground, they toiled until their skin turned gray from dust, and their lungs filled with poison. Few ever emerged alive. Those who did were no longer human in the eyes of society. They were ghosts of the empire's hunger for punishment. And yet, the system persisted, century after century, because it worked. Rome remained obedient. Fear was the glue that held its vastness together. At the heart of it all was a philosophy of belief that pain purified, that discipline created harmony, that justice must be seen to exist in flesh and blood. Even emperors participated in this theater. Nero, for instance, turned execution into performance. He was said to have watched from his private gardens as Christians were burned alive at night, illuminating his feasts like living candles. Caligula, ever the mad god king, enjoyed inventing punishments on a whim-ordering nobles to crawl at his feet or kiss his sandals, executing men simply to test whether his soldiers would obey. In their excess, the emperors revealed the deeper truth of Roman punishment. It was not just about law, but about power, the intoxicating reminder that one man's will could decide another's fate with a gesture. Still, beneath all the spectacle, there was fear, even among the mighty. Senators who once voted for execution would later find themselves accused of treason, their own names scratched from marble. The cycle never ended. It was as though Rome's justice fed upon itself, a serpent devouring its tail, each generation inheriting the cruelty of the last. The poor, the slaves, the foreigners, they bore the brunt of it, but none were safe. And in that strange equality of fear, the empire found its unity as night descended upon Rome. The torches along the Forum flickered like dying stars, and the air grew still. The cries of the condemned faded into silence, leaving behind only the murmur of the Tiber as it flowed through the city's heart. Those who had witnessed the day's punishments would return home, whispering prayers to household gods, clutching their children a little tighter, grateful simply to have survived another day in a city that demanded so much obedience. Justice in Rome was never about right or wrong. It was about the preservation of order, the constant reminder that Rome itself was eternal, and that individuals were merely shadows beneath its vast and unfeeling gaze. And so the empire endured, its streets built on discipline, its temples lined with offerings, and its legacy carved not in mercy, but in the quiet, enduring memory of fear. In the slow rhythm of passing centuries, as the empire stretched from the sands of Africa to the mists of Britannia, the Roman philosophy of punishment evolved into something both majestic and monstrous. a reflection of the empire's power and its paranoia. Rome did not simply punish crime, it celebrated the act of punishment itself, turning pain into ritual and suffering into instruction. Every sentence carried layers of meaning, every execution a symbol of Rome's eternal control. It was said that to live in Rome was to live under the constant eyes of gods and men alike, both watching to see whether one's loyalty would waver, and when it did, even slightly, the response was immediate and absolute. The Roman mind was disciplined, but also deeply superstitious. It believed that every sin disturbed the balance of the world, and that punishment restored harmony. Thus, punishment was never just legal, it was cosmic. It had to mirror divine justice, and the more spectacular the act, the more it pleased both gods and emperor. One of the strangest examples of this was the punishment of treason, or majestas, the crime of dishonoring the majesty of Rome itself. This could mean plotting against the emperor, but it could also mean something as trivial as criticizing his statue, or failing to speak highly enough of his deeds. Under emperors like Tiberius, paranoia turned majestas into a weapon. Senators, poets, and generals were executed for the faintest suspicion of disloyalty. Their property was seized, their families ruined, and their names cursed. Sometimes, the condemned were forced to take their own lives in the Roman manners, lidding their wrists in a bath, as friends looked on with stoic faces, pretending it was an honorable end. The Romans called this noble death, but it was merely control in disguise. Even in death, the state dictated the manner, the time, the ceremony. To disobey was to invite something far worse: public execution and the extinction of your family's name. And then there was the punishment of damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. To the Roman crowd, this was one of the most thrilling spectacles. Criminals, slaves, and even early Christians were thrown into the arena to face lions, leopards, and bears. The crowd roared with delight as the great iron gates opened and the beasts emerged, golden fur glinting beneath the sun, their eyes wild with hunger. The condemned might be armed with a small dagger or nothing at all. Sometimes, to make the show more interesting, the criminals were dressed as mythological figures. A man might play Orpheus, trying to charm the beasts with a fake lyre, only to be torn apart moments later. Another might play Icarus, lifted into the air by hidden ropes before being dropped into a pit of wild dogs. The games were part punishment, part entertainment, and part religion. The Romans believed that bloodshed purified the empire, that by watching death they reaffirmed their own vitality. It was a cycle of fear disguised as glory. For those in the stands, the arena was a reminder of the empire's strength. For those in the sand, it was the final proof of Rome's cruelty. The punishments also extended to slaves, whose lives were seen as tools of their masters. If a master was murdered, Roman law demanded that all his household slaves be executed, whether guilty or not. Hundreds could die for the crime of one, crucified in long rows along the roads leading out of the city. It was meant to send a message that no one could escape responsibility, that fear itself was the best guarantee of obedience. When a senator named Pedunius Secundus was killed by one of his slaves, the Senate debated whether to enforce this ancient law. The people protested, saying it was too cruel, but the law was upheld, and 400 slaves were put to death. The execution took an entire day, the streets filled with silent onlookers. Rome called it justice. History remembers it as horror. Yet to the Romans, this was not contradiction. Cruelty was simply another form of order. Even the military, Rome's pride and backbone, was not spared from bizarre punishments. Discipline in the legions was sacred, and disobedience, cowardice, or desertion were met with terrifying precision. The most dreaded of all was decimatio decimation, the execution of every 10th soldier in a disgraced unit. When a legion mutinied or fled from battle, the commander would line up his men, count them off, and every 10th man would be beaten to death by his comrades. The survivors learned obedience through the sound of breaking bones and the screams of men they had once called brothers. This practice, though rare, haunted the army for centuries. It taught soldiers that Rome valued discipline above life itself, and that loyalty to the state outweighed loyalty to each other. But punishment in Rome was not always physical. Sometimes it was social, psychologically quiet erasure that killed the spirit before the body. Exile was one of these forms. To be exiled from Rome was to lose not just your home, but your very identity. The exiled were forbidden from approaching the city, their property confiscated, their names stricken from official rolls. Some, like the poet Ovid, managed to survive in distant lands, writing letters to the city that had abandoned them. Others simply vanished into the dust of forgotten provinces. To be exiled was to become a ghost alive, but unseen. Religious crimes were treated differently still. The Romans feared impiety above almost all else, for it was believed to invite divine wrath upon the entire city. Anyone who desecrated a temple, mocked a priest, or violated a sacred boundary could be beaten, stoned, or buried alive. Vestal virgins, the priestesses sworn to eternal chastity, were given the most haunting fate of all. If one was found guilty of breaking her vow, she was placed in an underground chamber with a lamp, a loaf of bread, and a jar of water, then sealed away forever. Rome could not spill her blood, for that would offend the goddess Vesta. So instead, it buried her alive, allowing the earth to swallow the sin. Above ground, the people would weep and whisper, wondering whether the gods would forgive them. Even emperors faced their own unique brand of punishment. When they fell from favor, their deaths were as elaborate as their lives. Nero, the tyrant who believed himself divine, took his own life before capture, whispering, "What an artist dies in me." Others were strangled, stabbed, or forced to open their veins in baths scented with wine. Their statues were toppled, their images defaced, their names cursed for eternity. Rome was merciless even to its own creators. No one was above the law of fear. What made all this even stranger was how calmly it was accepted. The people of Rome did not see these punishments as monstrous. They saw them as necessary, as part of the order of things. The crowd at the Colosseum did not flinch at blood. They saw justice, divine and human, intertwined. Parents brought their children to watch executions, teaching them from an early age that Rome's strength came from its discipline, its readiness to destroy in order to preserve. Even philosophers who criticized cruelty like Seneca or Cicero often spoke of punishment as a moral good, a cleansing act that restored virtue. Rome had created a world where violence was righteousness and mercy a weakness as centuries rolled on, and the empire began to crack under its own weight. the punishments grew even more desperate, even more performative. The more Rome feared collapse, the harsher its justice became. It was as though the empire was punishing itself, trying to bleed out the corruption festering in its heart. By the time the barbarians stood at the gates, the old rituals had lost their meaning. The arenas fell silent, the public executions fewer, the people more weary than afraid. And yet the memory of those centuries of terror lingered. Rome's strange justice lived on in law codes, in languages, in the quiet assumption that order must be maintained at any cost. When night fell upon the empire, when the torches along the Tiber burned low, the ghosts of the condemned still seemed to wander the streets. Some said they could hear the whispers of the buried Vestal virgins, the cries of the slaves, the growls of beasts echoing from the old arenas. The stones of Rome had seen too much, absorbed too much. They remembered every scream, every sigh, every name scratched from marble. To walk through Rome after midnight was to walk through history's darkest dreams, to feel the weight of a world that built its glory upon the suffering of its own. And though the empire is long gone, its spirit remains in the quiet corners of human law, in the flicker of judgment that still divides right from wrong through fear. Rome may have fallen, but its punishments never truly died. They simply changed form, hidden behind gentler words and cleaner instruments. The world has forgotten their cruelty, but the silence of ancient Rome still hums beneath our civilization, like an echo from the Tiber that refuses to fade. As the Roman Empire aged, its punishments began to shift from public spectacle to quiet cruelty. Yet the purpose remained the same, to remind the people that Rome's power was absolute, unending, and divine. The air of the city, once filled with the noise of construction and triumph, carried instead the murmurs of fear and obedience. From the Palatine Hill, emperors gazed over marble rooftops and torchlit avenues, believing their laws eternal, their justice perfect. But behind the gilded facades and polished temples, the machinery of Rome's punishment grew darker and more intricate. The empire that had once prided itself on order and discipline was now ruled by paranoia, intrigue, and vengeance disguised as law. The Senate no longer debated mercy, it performed loyalty. Judges spoke with trembling voices. Scribes wrote sentences with ink that felt like blood. And the prisons of Rome, buried beneath the streets, filled with those who had whispered too loudly or offended the wrong man. These prisons were not like the cells of modern times. They were tombs carved into the earth, damp and airless, where prisoners waited for trials that would never come. The most infamous of all was the Tullianum, known later as the Mamertine prison. It sat beneath the Capitoline Hill, near the very heart of Roman power, yet it was a place of forgotten souls. Prisoners were lowered into its stone chamber through a hole in the ceiling, left in darkness that smelled of rot and rust. The water that seeped through the walls gathered into shallow pools, cold and foul. Here, enemies of the state waited for execution. Foreign kings, captured generals, and traitors condemned by the Senate. It was said that even light dared not enter this place, that once the iron grate closed, the world above ceased to exist. Death came not by sword, but by suffocation, starvation, or despair. When the time arrived, the guards would descend with ropes or garrots, strangling the prisoner quietly in the shadows. Then the bodies were dragged away through the lower tunnels and tossed into the Tiber at night. Rome called this efficiency. History calls it horror wrapped in ceremony. As the empire's borders stretched thinner, the punishments grew stranger still. Provinces, far from the capital, developed their own variations, hybrids of Roman law and local custom. In Egypt, rebels were buried alive in the sand, their faces turned toward the scorching sun. In Gaul, thieves were tied to trees and left for the wolves. In Judea, crucifixion became a tool of suppression, its victims displayed along roads leading to Jerusalem so that none could mistake Rome's authority. The message was always the same: obedience through terror. And the Romans, disciplined and methodical, perfected this philosophy until it became part of their identity. They wrote about it in legal codes, carved it in marble, and passed it to their descendants as though cruelty were a virtue. Even the language of punishment carried poetry. Words like supplicium, damnatio, flagellum, they rolled off the tongue like hymns, masking pain beneath elegance. But there was one form of punishment that blurred the line between execution and entertainment: the public humiliation of the condemned. In Rome's later centuries, the desire for spectacle never truly faded. It only changed shape. Those accused of minor offenses, cheating merchants, corrupt officials, adulterers, were paraded through the streets, stripped to the waist, and whipped while the crowd jeered. The Romans called it perduellio minor, a lesser treason, but the shame was no less severe. The condemned were forced to carry signs listing their crimes, sometimes wearing masks carved with the faces of beasts. Others were coated in soot and feathers, a mockery that made the people laugh even as it destroyed a man's dignity. The processions ended at the Forum, where soldiers read aloud the judgment before striking the final blows. For the people, it was justice done. For the condemned, it was an erasure of self. Rome understood that breaking the body was simple, but breaking the spirit, that was art. And in this cruel art, emperors became the greatest masters. Caligula turned punishment into theater, forcing senators to watch executions while he dined. Domitian ordered the deaths of philosophers who dared question his rule, calling it cleansing the city of corruption. Even the Stoic Marcus Aurelius, remembered as a philosopher king, upheld laws that demanded slaves be tortured before their testimony was accepted in court. In Rome, pain was truth. Without it, justice was incomplete. The crack of whips in the praetor's courtyard, the smell of burning oil, the murmurs of spectators, all of it blended into the city's daily rhythm. To live in Rome was to breathe in fear like air. Yet, despite its cruelty, there was something eerily consistent about Roman justice. It followed patterns, rituals, almost like a religion. Before each execution, priests performed small ceremonies, offering incense to the gods. The condemned were often allowed to pray or speak a final word, not out of mercy, but because Rome believed that death, to be pure, must follow order. Even in killing, there were rules. The executioner's tools were cleaned, the ground sprinkled with wine, and the crowd instructed to maintain silence at certain moments. It was a choreography of control, a reminder that even chaos must serve Rome's design. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that the soul of the condemned was freed through punishment, but his words carried an unease, as though even he feared what the empire had become. In the provinces, the punishments sometimes bordered on the absurd. Soldiers stationed at the frontiers devised new forms of torment, both out of boredom and cruelty. Rebels were tied to catapults and hurled into the air. Deserters were buried up to their necks and left for insects. In Carthage, tax evaders were chained to massive stones in the harbor, forced to watch the sea rise and fall around them. In Alexandria, rumor had it that magicians caught practicing forbidden rites were sewn into the hides of oxen and left beneath the sun until the leather shrank, crushing them alive. These stories, half myth and half truth, spread through the empire like dark lullabies, whispered in taverns and markets, teaching every listener the same lesson. Rome does not forget, and as the centuries wore on, even the executioners themselves became weary of their duty. Some said the men who carried out Rome's justice were haunted, their dreams filled with the faces of the dead. One legend tells of a centurion who, after years of performing crucifixions, began to see the victim's eyes in every flame. He fled into the desert, claiming that the gods had cursed him to feel every pain he had inflicted. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps just madness born of routine. For in the end, the cruelty of Rome devoured not only its victims, but also its enforcers. The empire was built upon discipline and obedience, but those virtues, when twisted too tightly, began to suffocate the very men who embodied them. By the time the empire neared its fall, justice had become spectacle without meaning. The punishments continued, but their symbolism faded. Where once the Pona Calais was a sacred ritual, it became mere curiosity. Crucifixion, once a warning to thousands, became commonplace. The crowd no longer watched in awe, but in weariness, as though they, too, were trapped in the endless cycle of pain and obedience. Rome, which had once punished to preserve itself, was now punishing out of habit. The law no longer reflected divine order, it reflected fear, chaos, and decay. And then, quietly, the empire began to die. The barbarian invasions, the corruption, the civil wars eroded the foundations that had held it together. The Colosseum's stones cracked, the temples lost their offerings, and the Tiber flowed past ruins where senators once stood in judgment. Yet, the ghosts of Rome's punishments did not vanish. They lingered in the collective memory of Europe, passed down through the ages in darker forms: dungeons, gallows, inquisitions. Rome's cruelty became the seed of future systems, disguised under new languages and new empires. And so, even as the eternal city crumbled, its legacy of discipline and fear endured. Tonight, if one were to walk through the ruins of the Forum, beneath the pale light of the moon, one might almost hear it, the faint echo of iron chains, the whisper of the condemned, the low murmur of a crowd that has been gone for 2,000 years. The stones still remember. They remember the weight of footsteps, the cries swallowed by marble, the prayers that rose and went unanswered. The air itself seems to hum with the memory of Rome's strange justice, that fragile balance between order and cruelty, between civilization and the abyss. And in that haunting stillness, one truth remains as ancient as the empire itself. Every civilization believes its laws are eternal, but it is always fear that binds its people together until the fear fades and the stones begin to crumble. Long after the fires of Rome dimmed and its marble glory cracked beneath centuries of dust, the strange, brutal genius of its punishments refused to die. It lingered like a ghost in the corridors of civilization, whispering in the ears of kings and conquerors who rose in its shadow. Though the empire itself fell to ruin, the Roman idea of justice, that order must be carved from fear, seeped into the roots of Europe and beyond. It lived in the laws of kingdoms that would come to call themselves civilized, in the prisons built upon the same principles of control, in the gallows raised where temples once stood. Rome had taught the world that punishment was not merely the correction of crime. It was performance, ritual, and the theater of authority. The centuries that followed merely changed the costumes. The stage remained the same. In medieval courts, nobles decreed that traitors be hanged, drawn, and quartered, a practice that carried the same logic as Rome's crucifixions, to make pain visible, to turn the body of the condemned into a warning. The crowd still gathered. The judges still sat in high places. The philosophy of the lash and the chain endured. Even the word justice carried the echo of Roman discipline, cold, efficient, unyielding. As the Middle Ages deepened, echoes of Roman cruelty found new faith under the cross. The Christian world that inherited Rome's bones also absorbed its punishments, weaving them into the fabric of divine judgment. Where Rome had executed in the name of the emperor, the Church punished in the name of God. Heretics replaced rebels. Blasphemers replaced traitors. Fire became the new cross. The Inquisition burned with the same logic that once fueled the Colosseum, the belief that suffering cleansed the soul, that the agony of one might preserve the purity of many. The robes had changed, the prayers had changed, but the rhythm of pain remained. Torture chambers replaced Roman prisons. Confession replaced trial. Absolution replaced execution. Yet all served the same hunger for order. Humanity, it seemed, could not forget Rome's lesson that to rule, one must make the ruled afraid. In the Renaissance, when art and reason returned to the world, the shadow of Rome's cruelty wore new clothes. Scholars admired Roman architecture, studied Roman philosophy, even revived its laws, but they also revived its punishments. Public executions became grand performances. Town squares were turned into amphitheaters once again, where bodies swung from ropes before silent crowds. The guillotine of later centuries, cold, mechanical, precise, was merely the Roman sword reborn in steel. Even in the age of enlightenment, when men spoke of liberty and progress, prisons multiplied, each cell a miniature Tullianum, dark and airless. Rome's legacy was not marble or empire, but a psychology of obedience, the belief that control requires spectacle, that justice must be seen to be believed. And so, the Roman tradition endured, invisible yet indestructible, shaping every courtroom and every sentence that followed. Yet history, in its quiet way, began to question the inheritance. Philosophers and poets began to whisper that perhaps cruelty was not strength, but sickness, not order, but decay. They wrote of mercy, of the dignity of the condemned, of the possibility that justice could exist without pain. But even as they dreamed of reform, the old ghosts stirred. Empires still rose and fell by Rome's example. Colonial powers brought law and punishment to foreign lands, calling it civilization. The whip returned under new banners. The gallows found new homes. The Roman ideal of discipline marched on beneath uniforms and flags. Soldiers became the new centurions. Prisons, the new provinces, and the same old words, duty, honor, law, were used to sanctify suffering. Rome had taught the world to build order from fear, and that lesson was not easily forgotten. And now, as the modern world stares into glowing screens and silent courthouses, the ghost of Rome still watches. It lives in the bureaucracies that decide who is guilty, in the quiet violence of systems that punish without blood, but with isolation and time. The old amphitheater has been replaced by the courtroom, the audience by the public's gaze through cameras and headlines. We still watch, still judge, still hunger for retribution disguised as justice. The methods have changed, the purpose has not. The Romans would recognize it all: the pride in punishment, the ceremony of law, the cold assurance that every empire tells itself before it falls that cruelty, if performed with enough order, becomes righteousness. But perhaps, in the end, that is the truest legacy of Rome. Not its architecture, not its philosophy, not its conquests, but its ability to turn punishment into permanence, to make cruelty seem reasonable, to teach the world that pain, when wrapped in ritual, can be beautiful. The ruins that remain are not just stone. They are reflections of ourselves, of how much of Rome still breathes in the systems we call civilized. And as the moonlight falls upon the broken pillars and scattered statues, one can almost hear it, the slow heartbeat of an empire that refused to die, whispering from beneath the dust, "Obey." Long after the last Roman soldier marched home and the legions vanished into dust, the soul of Rome lived on in the hearts of nations that came after. Its punishments, once carved in marble and blood, became invisible laws that guided kings, empires, and even democracies. The empire had fallen, yes, but its logic had not. The idea that civilization must discipline itself through pain, that authority must display power through punishment. From the ashes of the Colosseum to the gallows of London, from the dungeons of the Vatican to the workhouses of industrial Europe, Rome's shadow stretched endlessly, patient and silent. The medieval world inherited not only Roman roads and language, but also its iron concept of justice. Kings sat upon thrones that mimicked the Senate's authority, declaring that their divine right was law, and their prisons became cathedrals of suffering. Peasants were flogged, thieves branded, witches burned, all echoes of Rome's eternal lesson that suffering was the price of order. Even as the centuries passed, the whip, the chain, and the scaffold remained sacred instruments of civilization. The Romans had called their punishments art. Their descendants called them duty. In the dim corridors of medieval Europe, the resemblance to ancient Rome was uncanny. Torture chambers beneath castles mirrored the Tullian nuns' cold stone vaults, while inquisitors played the role once reserved for Roman judges, stern, methodical, and convinced of their righteousness. Each punishment carried a ritual: the reading of charges, the final confession, the moment of silence before agony began. These acts were never random. They were ceremonies, borrowed from Rome's understanding that power must perform itself. And though crosses had replaced eagles, the rhythm was the same: pain as purification, death as lesson. The Church spoke of salvation, but its methods bore the signature of empire. The executioners were priests in new robes, and their prayers, though holy, were no less chilling. Then came the Renaissance, that shimmering rebirth of art, knowledge, and reason. Yet beneath its beauty, the Roman spirit continued to whisper. Scholars translated Cicero and Seneca. Kings modeled their laws on Roman order. The grandeur of the empire returned, not in marble, but in ideology. Courts became theaters of morality, where judgment was spectacle. The guillotine, centuries later in revolutionary France, was the logical descendant of the Roman axe, a clean, efficient symbol of justice through death. Even as mankind spoke of enlightenment and human rights, the same old ghosts lingered. The philosopher might speak of freedom by candlelight, but outside, the prisons filled as they always had. Rome had taught the world that cruelty could be elegant, that the sight of punishment could calm the restless heart of society. It was no longer called cruelty, it was called law. Across the oceans, new empires rose upon the same foundations. In the colonies of the Americas, in the plantations of the Caribbean, the lash and the shackle became tools of empire once more. Soldiers and governors carried Roman discipline to lands Rome had never known. Chains replaced crucifixes, overseers replaced centurions, and still the lesson remained the same: obedience through fear. The world had changed its gods, but not its nature. The Roman ideal had taken root in the soul of mankind, the conviction that control was the highest form of peace, and in every age, that peace demanded pain. From medieval Europe to colonial empires, the Roman code endured like an unbroken line, passing from hand to hand, century to century, masked in progress yet unchanged at its core. But Rome's influence was not only in the cruelty of punishment, it lived in the structure of justice itself. The very concept of courts, verdicts, and sentences came from Roman law. It was Rome that defined guilt as an offense against the state, Rome that made the state a god to be appeased by sacrifice. Every modern nation that claims to be lawful owes its order to this ancient idea. When a judge lifts his gavel, when a sentence is pronounced, when a man stands trembling before the weight of law, Rome is there, unseen but unforgotten. Its temples have fallen, but its spirit rules still, not through emperors but through systems. And these systems, polished and civilized, still echo with the same old certainty that the balance of society rests on the suffering of the few. Even the prisons of the modern world, with their concrete walls and fluorescent light, are heirs to the Roman dungeon. The chains may be replaced by locks and cameras, but the principle is the same: isolation, control, and the slow erosion of self. Rome understood that punishment was not only about pain, but about silence, about the breaking of identity until only obedience remained. The prisoners of the 21st century might wear uniforms instead of shackles, but their ancestors are the same men who once lay forgotten beneath the Capitoline Hill. History, it seems, changes its language, but never its rhythm. And so, the shadow of the empire stretches even into our time. We no longer watch men torn apart by beasts, yet we gather around our screens to witness judgment in new forms: trials, scandals, public humiliation. The amphitheater has become digital, but the audience is as hungry as ever. The Romans once cheered for lions. Now we scroll and comment, still craving the spectacle of guilt and punishment. Rome taught us that justice must be seen, that it must have an audience, and we have never unlearned it. The cruelty has become quieter, more sophisticated, but the pleasure of judgment remains. The empire may have fallen, but its morality, its obsession with punishment, still governs the human heart. And if one listens closely, the echoes can still be heard in the creak of prison doors, in the quiet approval of a crowd that watches a life destroyed in the name of justice, in the cold language of law that measures human suffering in years and sentences. The empire that died 2,000 years ago has not vanished. It has evolved. Its monuments are not marble columns, but institutions. Its Caesars are not emperors, but systems too vast to name. The Romans built their power from discipline and fear, and we, their descendants, still build our order the same way. Civilization, after all, is only as gentle as its punishments. As the moon glows over ruins and cities alike, it is easy to imagine that the stones of the old forum are whispering, not of glory, not of conquest, but of continuity. Rome's cruelty never ended. It simply learned to wear a new face. And perhaps that is the empire's greatest triumph, that long after its fall, the world still kneels to its unseen law, believing that punishment is the price of peace. The torches may have dimmed, the arenas may be empty, but the idea endures that pain, when justified, becomes sacred. The ruins of Rome are silent now, but silence does not mean peace. Beneath those fallen arches and weathered stones lies something eternal, not the empire's armies or emperors, not its temples or treasures, but the echo of its cruelty. That strange conviction that suffering brings order, that pain sustains civilization. For centuries, this whisper has passed from age to age, reshaping itself to fit new faces, new flags, new faiths. Rome's punishments may have vanished from the arenas, but they still live quietly in the way humans govern, the way we judge, the way we believe that justice must hurt to be real. The same logic that once fed men to lions now feeds systems of law, power, and control that exist in our own world. We do not watch blood on the sand anymore. We watch humiliation on screens. We do not build amphitheaters. We build prisons, detention centers, and bureaucracies where people disappear slowly, quietly, forgotten just as they were beneath the Capitoline Hill. Rome did not die. It simply became invisible, woven into the heartbeat of modern civilization. If you close your eyes and imagine the streets of ancient Rome, the shouts of merchants, the clang of metal, the smell of smoke and sweat, it feels alive still, only changed in form. The marble temples have turned into courthouses, the praetors into judges, the crowd into the public. We still gather to witness guilt, to affirm that the law is stronger than chaos. We have inherited not Rome's empire, but its psychology, the belief that justice must be seen to be believed, that punishment, if hidden, loses its meaning. 2,000 years have passed, and still the same drama plays out. Where once the condemned stood in chains before emperors, today they stand before cameras and juries, awaiting the same silence before judgment. The faces have changed, but the ritual remains. It is a performance older than memory, passed from the marble heart of Rome into the electric pulse of the modern world. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that pain was the teacher of the soul, that through agony man was purified. He meant it as reflection, but Rome took it as commandment. And so, through the centuries, every system built on control has echoed that same idea. that people must be broken to be made good, that fear is the foundation of peace. Empires rose and fell under that logic. Monarchs enforced it with crowns, priests with crosses, governments with laws. Each believed itself just, each certain that punishment was necessary. The whip became the sermon, the sword became the signature, and the dungeon became the office. Rome's cruelty had evolved into administration, its blood into paperwork, its spectacle into bureaucracy. No longer did the crowd cheer at executions. Now it nodded in quiet approval as sentences were handed down, as lives were measured in years of confinement. Civilization had refined its brutality, polishing it until it gleamed with reason. But the essence was the same: obedience born from fear, order carved from suffering. And yet, there has always been resistance. Even in Rome's time, there were voices that questioned: poets, slaves, philosophers who saw in cruelty not strength but sickness. They asked, softly, if justice could exist without pain. Their whispers did not save them then, but their ideas endured, buried deep, like seeds beneath the ruins. Over centuries, those seeds sprouted in the minds of reformers and dreamers who believed that mercy could build a better world. But mercy, unlike cruelty, does not make spectacle. It is quiet, unseen, and fragile. It cannot fill arenas. And so, while mercy blooms in shadows, cruelty still commands the stage. We speak of progress, of enlightenment, of humanity. Yet, our prisons are full, our wars relentless, our systems as cold and structured as the marble courts of Rome. The empire's body has died, but its soul lives in our institutions. Perhaps this is the secret tragedy of civilization, that we have confused justice with control, law with vengeance, punishment with peace. Rome began this confusion when it built its empire upon discipline and fear, believing that order was worth any cost. And though its walls fell, the idea survived because it comforted us. It gave us structure, direction, certainty. Pain, after all, is easier to administer than understanding. The empire taught that punishment could cleanse, that it could make the world stable, predictable. It promised safety, and humanity never stopped chasing that illusion. But every generation that inherits Rome's logic also inherits its blindness, the belief that cruelty, when organized, becomes morality. So the whisper continues. It echoes in courtrooms, in classrooms, in prisons, and parliaments. It hums in the laws that divide, in the voices that condemn, in the comfort of believing that the guilty must suffer so the innocent can sleep. It is the whisper of Rome, eternal and unseen, telling us that civilization depends on punishment, and perhaps, in a way, that is true, not because justice demands it, but because fear sustains it. The Romans did not invent cruelty, they perfected it. And in perfecting it, they taught the world to disguise it as virtue. The lash became law, the crucifix became symbol, the execution became order. And in that transformation, the human heart found a strange peace, the peace of believing that pain, when inflicted by authority, is righteous. Now, in the quiet of the modern age, as satellites orbit where Roman eagles once flew, the same paradox remains. We look upon the ruins of the empire and call them beautiful, forgetting what they once stood for. The Colosseum is no longer a place of death, but of wonder, visited by millions who walk its corridors without hearing the screams that built it. The marble forms, the broken statues, the carved reliefs, all sanitized by time, their cruelty softened by centuries of admiration. History has polished Rome's memory, just as Rome once polished its laws. But beneath the beauty, the truth remains. The empire was built not only by architects and soldiers, but by pain, systematic, deliberate, glorified pain. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, the stones will still speak. They will tell of men thrown to beasts, of slaves nailed to wood, of whispers silenced by iron. They will tell of justice that believed itself divine, of punishment that called itself holy. They will remind us that every empire that claims to be eternal forgets the cost of its permanence. For cruelty, once sanctified, becomes part of the foundation, and foundations, no matter how old, never stop shaping what stands above them. The world today walks upon Rome's shadow, unaware that the ground beneath still hums with its heartbeat. Every court, every cell, every execution is a faint echo of a system 2,000 years gone, but never truly buried. Rome's cruelty is no longer visible, but it is alive in laws, in hierarchies, in the belief that pain brings order. And so the whisper endures, drifting through time like smoke, ancient and familiar. It has no emperor now, no senate, no gods. It lives in thought, in structure, in habit. It is the whisper that says, obey, for the world is chaos without control. Punish, for the guilty must suffer. Endure, for order demands it. This whisper is what makes civilization both beautiful and terrifying. The quiet, eternal murmur that began in the marble halls of Rome and now sleeps in the heartbeat of every city built in its image.